Right. So we go to what I think that you were actually wanting to know, which is translated tafsirs. Translated tafsirs. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of classical works and then in terms of modern works. So classical works of tafsir, first of all, we should know that what are the important works of tafsir? It's a bit unfair to suggest that some tafsirs are important, some tafsirs are not important. But what I wanted to hint at, and just really hint, is that what we see as important is sometimes related to what happens to be translated into our language, right? And even in terms of the Arabic language, what is seen as important is what happens to be published as opposed to the things that were left in manuscript form and not published or were published later. So certain tafsirs caught the attention of or were promoted and supported by particular actors on the world stage. Certain states or movements have promoted them. And so they came in the public perception and even scholars' perception to appear to be the most important works. And here I'm going to underline in particular the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, right? So we have the tafsir of At-Tabari, the tafsir of Ibn Kathir. I'm not going to take away at all from the value of those works, the importance of those works, the benefit that can be derived from them. But just the idea of seeing the history of tafsir as being centered on these works would be very limited perspective. How could we decide what's important? There could be all sorts of different ways that we could decide that. One of those could be, what were the tafsirs that were most being used to educate Muslim scholars in the different places and times throughout our history? So there are people who have done thorough work on these things, they've researched these things, and the answer that's coming up again and again is that there were certain tafsirs that were central to the way that the whole genre, the whole field and the craft and discipline of exegesis was constructed. So among those central works was Al-Kashaf by Imam al-Zamakhshari, right? The Kashaf of Zamakhshari. Al-Zamakhshari had a particular genius in investigating the linguistic aspects of the Qur'an and the eloquence of the Qur'an. And Imam Zamakhshari was, he belonged to a group or a sect called the Mu'tazila. And because of that, there are things about his tafsir which are problematic from a Sunni perspective, right? Both in terms of the things he says out loud, and sometimes the way that he says certain things, there's buried within it a certain flavor of i'tizal, right? Of his, particular worldview, which does not always accord with a Sunni worldview. And when I say Sunni here, I just mean broadly Sunni, not Mu'tazili. But I don't want to get into all discussions about different groups and this and that. However, I have already started doing that, so I may as well follow through a little bit when I talk about who promoted At-Tabari and Ibn Kathir. But the tafsir of Zamakhshari is something central, and then you'll see that reflected in all the important works of tafsir that followed, right? So major works of tafsir all engage with tafsir of Zamakhshari, but not endorsing everything in it. So what they will do is what I sometimes call sunnatize, right? So not sanitize. Now we all have to sanitize our hands, right? So what our Sunni authors would do is they would sunnatize a work like Zamakhshari. So the most famous of those is Tafsir of Al-Baydawi. The Tafsir of Al-Baydawi is also one of the central things in the curricula of the madrasas of the Islamic world, or the seminaries, where people were trained, especially trained to become scholars. They would study the Tafsir of Zamakhshari, Tafsir of Baydawi, Tafsir of Al-Razi, which also engaged with Zamakhshari. Al-Baydawi drew from not only Zamakhshari but also Al-Razi and also Al-Raghib al-Asfahani. So the tafsirs have a relationship with each other. They draw from each other, but there are certain ones that sort of form some of the core of how of the method of how to approach the text of the Quran. So the Kashaf of Imam Zamakhshari was particularly central to this, right? So then, with the advent of Salafi movements in the last couple of centuries, there was, a turn towards some of the works that went back to the more athari perspective, or that is to say, the more hadith-based perspective on tafsir. So the tafsir of At-Tabari is taken as an example of that. Why? Well, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, in his treatise, when he gives an introduction to tafsir, he mentions particular tafsirs as being important, and he gives special praise to the tafsir of At-Tabari. And this has led a lot of people, including people who are actually very positive and even fans of At-Tabari and promote At-Tabari, to actually completely misunderstand what the tafsir of At-Tabari is like, right? So it has become very common for people to say that the tafsir of At-Tabari has only got narrations in it, pure narrations. But that is absolutely not the case. The tafsir of At-Tabari is a very complex work, a very sophisticated work. It has a number of different approaches and concerns within it, which are all woven together in a very intricate work, which is why actually it is actually very valuable. It is actually a very important piece of work, but not that it's been central to the curriculum of Islamic seminaries for all these centuries. But it is certainly worthwhile to bring that to the table and to use it and to benefit from that particular classical work. Because, among other things, Al-Imam Al-Tabari brings narrations to support everything that he's saying, whether it's the opinion that he supports or one that he mentions along with his preferred opinion. He will tell you, ذِكْرُ مَنْ قَالَ ذَلِكَ, and he will tell you from the Salaf, there were some who have said this, and then you can get a lot from studying those narrations as well, and how they're worded and how people were talking at that time. So that's to give an idea about some of the important tafsirs classically. But then let's see how we are doing in terms of translations. Right. So I've mentioned the tafsir of At-Tabari. We have some translations from At-Tabari. There was a previous one done by, and he was a Muslim scholar as well. Is it John Cooper? I think his name is John Cooper. Which was partial. I think he started at the beginning, but he only got so far before he died, rahimahullah. And then we have got much more recently this version, which has been produced by the Al-Bayt Institute of Jordan, which I'm going to speak more about, and published by the Islamic Text Society, because my own work is with the same project and same publisher, and my own work on Tafsir al-Razi. So this book is this translated by Scott Lucas, another Muslim scholar. And the thing is that it is not a translation of the full Quran, as you can tell. You couldn't get the whole of Tafsir al-Tabari into these 2 volumes. What it is a selection of parts from the Quran, and then those selections are translated in full. So if it's a short surah, it could be the whole surah, or otherwise it is a few verses from Al-Baqarah, for example, right? So this is all mentioned on the back. I'll tell you just volume 1. It's got Al-Tabari's introduction, the Fatiha, the throne verse, Ayat al-Kursi, the final 3 verses from Al-Baqarah as well, 2 verses from Al-Imran, 2 passages from Surat Al-Tawbah, 2 stories from Surat Al-Kahf, just the ayah of An-Nur from Surat An-Nur, or actually a few verses with it, the whole of Surat Al-Sajda and the whole of Surat Yasin. That's volume 1, and then volume 2 has got a few other surahs, including some of the short surahs in the last juz. So we have Tafsir al-Tabari in English. It's a good work. It's well translated. I have some observations about some of the technicalities of translating tafsir. As a very general point, and this could apply to this work and others, people should not rush anyway to translate, to be a translator, right? And also being a translator, there might be things that you are more suited for and things that you're less suited for. When I started in the field of translation, I was offered a piece of work to do, which was Ibn al-Jawzi's history work, Al-Muntazam. And I said no. I said no to that because I'm not a historian. Therefore, while my Arabic would be fine, there might be things that are place names, and I translate it, and I think it's a person's name, or I think it's just a normal word. I will just miss the context. I will not understand what's going on because I'm not deeply embedded in history writing and how it works, right? So I would say that for tafsir especially, okay, yeah, it's possible to translate works that are outside your field of specialization. It's possible. But I get very annoyed with what I see going on in tafsir translations, mainly because the people working on it are typically not trained in tafsir. And they should just leave it until somebody comes along who can do it, rather than translating in a way which is not going to be satisfactory. Okay, so we need to have an appreciation of the way that tafsir works, the way that the writers are framing their discussions in order to know how to translate it accurately, right? So that's a general point. I'm not applying it to any book, but I'm telling you that when reading books of tafsir in translation, you might find inaccuracies in some works. You might find things that are unsatisfactory in lesser ways, right? It might still be accurate, but it could be clunky because the person didn't know how to reword that confidently because they didn't understand, okay, how should a tafsir work be translated, right? So that's At-Tabari. I'm mentioning a few classical works, as I said, and there are some that I have here and some that I don't have here. So let me see. Al-Razi, okay. Al-Razi comes next in my chronology here. This is the first volume of Tafsir Al-Razi. I can't comment too much on it because it's my translation, so it's good. Yani, what can I say? But this work is obviously the things that I'm saying to you that I complain about others. Naturally, I try to not make those mistakes in my own work. So I've tried my best to really understand Al-Razi on his own terms and as a mufassir. And so what you have here already available is the first volume, which covers the Fatiha. And in fact, it covers a lot of things around the Fatiha, right? So the first third of the book was called the first kitab, is apparently around A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, right? I'll show you exactly. Yeah, that much of it is around A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. But in reality, it is an introduction to the various linguistic things, almost philosophical aspects of language as well. Then you've got the second kitab, which is that much. And this is apparently around Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so that gets you all the way to page 271 by now. And although it is around Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in reality it's around various aspects of theology, the names of Allah, attributes of Allah. Then you have got the third book, which has a few introductory chapters about the names of the Fatiha, virtues, wisdoms. And then it's got a big fiqh chapter about fiqh questions around reciting the Basmalah, reciting the Fatiha aloud or not in the prayers. And you guys will like this because it's a very Shafi'i chapter, because Imam al-Razi was a Shafi'i scholar. So he's also arguing here against the Hanafi positions, right? But I'm more of a Hanafi, so in my footnotes I give some responses of later Mufassirs to some of the argumentation of al-Razi. So then you've got the main part of the exegesis of Al-Fatiha in book 3, chapter 5. So it takes a while to get there, but I've given you the secret. If you have this book, you just, if you want to get straight to it, you can. But of course, there's a lot of benefit in everything that comes before that as well. So Tafsir al-Razi is a work ongoing. I'm working on a second volume, which should be out let's say in about a year or a bit more than a year, because it's been a bit of a struggle. But this second volume will span Surat Yusuf, Surat Al-Kahf, Surat Al-Naml, and Surat Al-Mulk. Okay, so some of these, I've completed them, and some of them are still working on editing. And Surah Yasin also is another one, which is in the volume, although we're having a bit of discussion around that now because there is an issue around the authorship of the tafsir of Surah Yasin and certain other surahs in Imam al-Razi's tafsir, whereby I am almost certain, based on the work of some scholars who have argued this convincingly, that certain surahs were not written, their commentary was not written by Imam al-Razi, but by someone later. So my view is that this should be not published in the same volume of translation as the rest of the surahs. Okay, so let me go through the rest of the section before I look at some of your questions so far. Right, another important tafsir is the Tafsir of al-Baydawi. And Tafsir al-Baydawi, there have actually been a number of translations done in the past, including by some Orientalists. So I have on my academia page, if you ever want to go there, very detailed scribbles and notes over this translation, which was done here in my city. I'm in Glasgow, and this was a Glasgow University translation. So that's quite special to me. This was done in 1957. But this is a really, really terrible translation of the Tafsir of Surah Yusuf. It is chock full of errors. It was only after I'd done all that annotating that I realized, and I was informed, and I was sent this translation by A.F.L. Beeston, another Orientalist scholar. And this translation of Surah Yusuf is actually very good. I still have noticed some mistakes, and I'm still annotating it, but it is a much, much better translation, much more sensibly done. Okay. And then as I just recently got hold of this reprint of Margoliouth translation of Surat Al-Imran, I'll just show you a little bit from inside. This is where they reprint old books, and you can buy them online. Their cover is ridiculous and strange, but the inside is just how it was printed many decades ago. So this is a translation of Al-Imran, which I haven't read yet, so I can't say too much about it. But the ongoing work now on Tafsir al-Baydawi is this one by G.F. Haddad. And this was the first volume that was published a few years ago. It actually won an award, which is called the Shaykh Hamad Award for Translation. I mean, so did Tafsir al-Razi, by the way, alhamdulillah, a couple of years later, no, the following year, in fact. So the Tafsir of Baydawi is actually something that Shaykh Haddad is continuing to work on, and he has a plan to publish the whole Tafsir. So by the time that's done, that will be a very major contribution to Tafsir in English. It's a very thorough translation from what I've seen, from what I've looked through. He's very, very exacting and precise in his approach to translation. Not lazy in the least. Okay, so there's a lot of benefit in this work. I don't know whether his subsequent volumes are going to be as detailed as his volume 1, but this is certainly a very valuable piece of work. We also have some volumes of Tafsir al-Qurtubi. So this is there's an older print of it, but this is the newer print by Diwan Press. Aisha Bewley has got some surahs already out. So that's volume 1, and volume 2 is almost the end of Al-Baqarah. There is a volume 3, there might be a volume 4. There's an introductory volume which I didn't show you. So that's work that's ongoing at Tafsir al-Qurtubi. I'm actually working on, I'm reworking Sister Aisha Bewley's translation of Tafsir of Ibn Juzay at the moment. So she translated that and it hasn't been published, and I'm working on that with a group of students as well who are observing the process. So they're seeing also the type of corrections that I have to do in order to make the text accurate, the translation accurate, but also the things that I'm doing to try to make it more, just more intelligible to an English reading audience, right? So to try to make it flow better, rather than looking too much like a translation, right? So to some extent, you want, as a reader, to be able to forget that you're reading a translation. There's some debate around these kind of aesthetic factors, but this, I think it should be something that you understand as it is in front of you, without having to sort of try to back translate and what was it in the original Arabic, so that I can understand, right? So that's some work that's ongoing. The Tafsir of Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi. We also have 2 editions of Tafsir al-Jalalain. Al-Jalalain is a very famous one. You may well be familiar with it. It is a short tafsir. It is tafsir mukhtasar, like that of Ibn Juzay, but even briefer than Ibn Juzay's. Now there are actually 2 translations of Tafsir al-Jalalain. One of them is by Aisha Bewley as well. As you can see, she has done a great many works. She has a great many translations of different works, both in the field of tafsir and in other fields, right? The other translation by Faraz Hamza was translated in the same series as the one that I showed you from Al-Razi and Al-Tabari, which is the Royal Al-Bayt Institute of Jordan. So the Royal Al-Bayt Institute, if you go to their website, you can find that there is a whole series of translations of tafsir that have been done. So we've got Al-Tabari, Al-Razi, which I've mentioned. We've got Jalalain. We also have a number of Sufi tafsirs, the tafsir of Al-Tustari, Lata'if al-Isharat of Al-Qushayri. So we have a number of different tafsirs that are available of different types and styles. We also have Asbab al-Nuzul of Al-Wahidi. We also have Tanwir al-Miqbas, which is called the Tafsir of Ibn Abbas. However, that particular work is very doubtful that it goes back to Ibn Abbas. Its chain of narration is the weakest that it could possibly be. It is authored by someone else, but certainly could contain, valuable tafsir information from the early generations, and some of it might go back to Ibn Abbas, but the point is we cannot rely on it and say this is the tafsir of Ibn Abbas, right? But for whatever reason, that was also selected by the project for translation, and it's available. The website for that is altafsir.com, right? altafsir.com. It's got all this kind of material, and then there's specific websites which have got the translations. So that's a general overview of English classical tafsirs. I may have missed something out, but that's what that comes to mind. Let's have a look at your questions so far. In terms of, okay, when you said translations are tafsir, do you mean because the translator refers to several tafsir books? One way or another, I'm saying that translation is tafsir because it is explaining the meaning of the Quran. So as soon as it's doing that, it is tafsir. Do the translators actually refer to books of tafsir? Some of them do, and as it appears, some of them don't. And even those who do, don't always seem to get it right about what the mufassirin are actually saying. That's my observation, but for the most part, they are dependent upon tafsir works in order to help them to understand. But sometimes translators are just going by their instinct. Sometimes they're copying each other, and that probably happens a great deal. Why is Ibn Kathir tafsir predominant in the Salaf movement? Ibn Kathir tafsir is predominant because Ibn Kathir used a very hadith-based approach in his tafsir. He used the tafsir of Al-Tabari, but he further added analysis and improvement to the hadith-based system of Al-Tabari. He was a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, and those are the reasons that Ibn Kathir's tafsir is predominant in the Salafi movement. question about not the best translation because I won't answer it. Good. But often practically we should choose one. No, you're just tricking me into asking what's the best. Yeah. You're just trying to trick me. I see what you're doing. Okay. What do you think are the best translations of tafsirs we should all have in our homes? Inshallah, I'm doing that. But part of the problem is in English, we do not have many. We do not have many to choose from. So we're starting to see more. And so those are the ones that we have to get. It just sort of works that way. So I'm just making some observations about them. I just realized that I didn't talk about the Ibn Kathir translations. I'm going to do that in a minute, inshallah. Okay, also not going to ask the best translation. Changing when you find something's not clear. When I read Urdu translations, I see a drastic difference. Sometimes they're clunky and unsatisfactory. There's a lot of works which compare translations in different languages. But you know, those are things you could maybe look through the Global Quran Project. You could find some resources and information through that, because we are posting even every week a Quran translation of the week, where we're just giving a little bit of insight through our Facebook, through our Twitter, Glowcore, just some information about translations in various languages, not saying that they're the best or anything like that. Why these surahs in specific? I think you're asking about the surahs in Tafsir al-Razi. It was not my thinking. These are the surahs that was asked to translate. And I think it's a good choice. Maybe the surprising one is Surat al-Naml. Apart from that, it's obvious because Surat Yusuf, Al-Kahf, Al-Mulk, Yasin, these are some of the most popular surahs that people enjoy or want to read and want to know the meaning of as well. Okay. So would you say reading tafsir in Arabic requires contextual knowledge, similar to reading the Quran in Arabic? Reading tafsir in Arabic, you know, you can learn on the way. You can learn by trying it and seeing what you struggle with, and perhaps speaking to those who can clarify things. Other than that, yes, tafsir, like any specific field, has got terminology which may not be immediately apparent. So reading fiqh works, for example, there will be a lot of things you won't understand unless you do a class of fiqh. Okay, when you cross-compare tafsirs in 20th century, okay, I'm going to come to modern tafsirs a bit later, so we can talk about that at that point. Rationalistic. Yes, so we're going to talk about the modern ones in a minute. So yes, I made a mistake and missed out Ibn Kathir. The reason is I don't have a copy of Ibn Kathir's tafsir in translation. So there are, from what I'm told, 3 translations of Tafsir Ibn Kathir in English alone. There are actually many in different languages. And my the head of my project, Professor Johanna Pink, is doing a lot of work investigating those different translations now. She's getting shipments into her office in Germany of translations in Turkish and Indonesian languages, and she's having a look at all these translations and trying to see what goes on behind them. That's part of her broader research that she's been doing and continues to do. And I also spoke to a colleague in the UK, Azhar Majoti, who told me about some of the research he's done into these editions of Ibn Kathir. So what we have in English are 2 complete ones and 1 incomplete one. When I say complete, I mean the whole Quran. However, they're all abridged versions of his tafsir, which is to say they didn't include every aspect of what he talked about. And to some extent, they sought to sort of make it more correct, or to remove things that they saw as incorrect, like certain Israeliyat which he included, and they felt that they can do without. They have removed those, or sanitized them, or sunnatized them, or salafized them. Imagine being more Salafi than Ibn Kathir. That's an achievement, right? So that's the kind of situation we have. And one of the editions, which is the Darus Salam edition, is also the basis probably for all the digital versions of Tafsir Ibn Kathir that we have on all these websites and apps, because as Azhar was telling me, they have at some point provided their text on a CD-ROM, and then it was taken off there, and now it's all over the internet. So by all means, read the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir in English. There's a lot of value in that. But what it does, and that's why I was drawing attention to it, is it makes an English reader really believe that Tafsir Ibn Kathir is the Tafsir of the Quran. You know, that is Tafsir. It is the only Tafsir, it's the only style of Tafsir. Only when we get more things out in translation will people begin to see, as I think with Tafsir of Al-Razi, for example, they can see that there are other levels of engagement with the text, there are other ways and styles of exegesis. Just give me a moment while I close this door. Right. So there I was talking about translation of classical tafsirs or historical tafsirs, and hopefully I covered the main basis of it. Right. So then we come to modern commentaries. Now, my purpose isn't to talk about all aspects of these modern commentaries, but we'd certainly see some shifts in the way that tafsir is being written in the modern period, right? A lot of what is actually found in the tafsir books was written for scholars, or was written with particular goals in mind of what a person is supposed to encounter. So a lot of it is explaining, as I said, the words and the structures and the i'rab and the grammar, and not necessarily the way that I think most of us as ordinary readers, and not just nowadays, I suppose all through history, you might have wanted, like, what is the Quran saying to me? What is the message? What is the relevance of this to my situation, my cultural environment, my political moment, right? So in the modern times, a lot more attention has turned towards trying to write tafsir in that kind of way, and make it relevant. And so to take from all the previous styles of tafsir and benefit from them, but to try to write perhaps in a more flowing style, to try to make more interconnections in what's being said, and then connect it to the societal context as well. So there are reasons behind that. There's a whole history of modernist development in tafsir. But then where does it get us in terms of what translations we have? So yeah, a few that I've got sitting here. I've got here, okay, Sayyid Qutb's. Okay, it's very important to mention. I've got Maulana Maududi's. I don't actually have these in full, but I have parts of them, but they are translated in full. And Sayyid Qutb's in particular, is a very different style, to the extent that plenty of people say that's not tafsir, and he himself might not have called it tafsir. I'm not sure that he ever did, but it was, as he says, in the shade of the Quran. Some reflections in the shade of the Quran. Sayyid Qutb was not a traditional religious scholar by any means. He was a literary critic. So he came to the Quran with his own set of interests and skills, and he read the Quran through that lens, and spoke about it in terms of his literary taste, and in terms of the passion that he had for the cause that he believed in, which was reestablishing Islam to the to the society, and even to to restore the Islamic governance and order after people had gone in various directions in the 20th century and before. So this work, at the end of the day, you call it a tafsir, don't call it a tafsir, what does it matter really? It actually, as the scholars have noted, Sayyid Qutb himself managed to revise a certain portion of it. I can't remember where he reached to, but he was writing this in prison. But he managed to go through and rework some of it. And the parts that he reworked, he made them more based on tafsir, specifically tafsir of Ibn Kathir. Again, why Ibn Kathir? that would be, you can relate that to some of the things I've said before, but certain parts of it are more in line with Tafsir of Ibn Kathir, but then he's reflecting on it from other angles. So if we were to sort of just throw that aside, I think we would lose out on a lot of goodness, a lot of khair. And that's not specific to Sayyid Qutb. It could be, we could say the same thing about anyone who is reflecting on the Quran from different angles, who has something valuable to say. And we can measure their words against the Quran itself and against mainstream scholarship to decide what we think about it. But it's just a different way of writing. It's if you call it tafsir or don't, it's just markedly different in the way, in what it aims to do, right? So it's about trying to inspire people with the Quran, right? فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مَنْ يَخَافُ وَعِيدٍ. Remember the ayah we mentioned before, right? So that one we have in English, Maududis we have in English. We also have some tafsirs which are maybe more traditional in their outlook and approach. So you have Ma'arif al-Qur'an. I don't have a copy, I need to buy one. Ma'arif al-Qur'an of Mufti Shafi, which is an Indian subcontinent tafsir. It is based on certain works within the subcontinent. It's based on certain Arabic works as well, like the tafsir of Al-Alusi. So that having been translated in English is a great thing. I haven't looked through it myself, but I'm told that it's a good translation as far as I know. I did see one funny thing recently which makes me perhaps doubt that, where it was translated that Musa ﷺ threw down his stick and it turned into a dragon, right? So obviously not a dragon, but into a snake or a serpent, but certainly not a dragon. Okay. Tafsir of As-Sa'di more recently. So another from Arabic, Tafsir of As-Sa'di or As-Sa'di has also been translated in full in English. Okay, so that's a few modern works. Since somebody has also mentioned his name, I'll bring it up. So Amin Ahsan Islahi also, but this is partial. So Islahi's work is a very different style. Again, Indian subcontinent work. It's focused on a sort of coherence approach, as it's called, contextual reading. So it's got a lot of things that you don't find in other tafsirs, based on the ideas and the methodology of his teacher, Hamiduddin Farahi. So the thing about that one is there's a couple of different translations, the different parts of the translation that have been done. Some of it is online. This translation project by Muhammad Salim Kayani ended at Al-Imran. He might have done a bit more, but then he passed away, rahimahullah. So I don't know whether that will be taken up and completed, that particular translation project. Right. And then the other thing with that is original writings. Okay, let me see a few of your questions before going on. When you cross-compare tafsirs in 20th century, such as Qutb's and Islahis, is more readily apparent Qutb's has a political ideology. What ways did past scholars safeguard against infusing polemics and rhetoric into the tafsir? That's a very complex question, probably beyond our session today. Probably needs some more thought and investigation as well. What are tafsirs that are or can be considered rationalistic, similar time to Asad's? Tafsir al-Manar is an example, one that he draws from. And also the tafsir of Tantawi Jawhari. Tantawi Jawhari is another example. And numerous, to be honest, in the modern age. Translations of Sa'di and Fi Dhalal. I don't have too much comment on the translations of them. I haven't seen Sa'di's translation. Fi Dhalal, I would have confidence in this translation because Adil Islahi, sorry, not Adil Islahi, Adil Salahi, the main translator of this series, is known for his competence and excellence. Other sects tafsirs, such as Tafsir al-Mizan by Tabatabai. Tabatabai's work is quite unique and quite special. It is a Shi'i tafsir, so it follows a lot of things that you can find in Shi'i tafsirs if you do read them. But what is quite special about it is focus on intra-Quranic or Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an, which was the subject of my thesis. My thesis, by the way, is available online for free, so you can read it. And I do talk a lot in there about Tabatabai and compare him with other Mufassirin, specifically in Surat Al-An'am, the whole of Surat Al-An'am. And I'm also teaching a series on the Kaski YouTube channel, where I'm going to go through the whole of Surat Al-An'am with this comparative method, and inshallah Tabatabai will be part of that account.